Not a ghostly whisper from the shadows. No, this was far more unsettling. It was the kind of whisper that came from somewhere you couldn't see, but felt too close to ignore. Richard, a 52-year-old retired machinist from Indiana, had never believed in ghost stories. He had a steady life, quiet evenings with his wife Nora, and the occasional poker night with the guys. But that autumn evening, while driving down a poorly lit service road in rural Kentucky, something changed. His truck's engine sputtered for the first time in years. He glanced at the fuel gauge, half full. The road was empty. Trees flanked either side like watching sentinels, their limbs clawing into the narrow sky. Then came the whisper again, louder this time. A harsh, broken voice, gasping words that didn't quite form sentences. Richard froze. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. He looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be there. No one, just darkness. Then, the radio flickered on with static, followed by a soft, dragging sound. Not out of logic, but instinct. Some primal reaction in his spine that screamed stop. As the truck idled, Richard reached for the glove compartment to check for a flashlight. That's when he saw it. Hanging from the edge of the passenger side window was a long, rusted metal hook. Old, jagged, and swaying like it had a weight of its own. He jumped back, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. He blinked, and it was gone. He got out of the truck slowly, shining the flashlight into the woods. The silence was unbearable. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking. No answer, but the air felt thick, oppressive, like he was being watched. Just as he turned to get back into the truck, he heard it again. The dragging. This time, it was unmistakably closer, like something metal scraping against the asphalt. Back in his motel room, Richard checked every window, every corner. He didn't tell Nora. She'd only worry. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been alone on that road. The next morning he saw a news report on the local station. Another disappearance along Hookman's Hollow. He leaned in. A woman had vanished 2 nights prior on the very same road. Locals claimed it was cursed, that something haunted those woods. Something with a hook. The name stirred something in Richard. He remembered a story from his youth, a tale told around bonfires about a one-handed killer who stalked remote roads. It had always seemed like nonsense, until now. He drove back to the area, against every better judgment he had. He needed to see it in daylight, but daylight offered no comfort. The road looked the same, narrow, cracked, and eerily still. A shredded piece of denim lay near the roadside. Richard felt cold seep into his chest. He stopped at a small diner near the edge of town and asked around. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Karen, went pale when he mentioned the hook. "You saw it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to leave. Tonight. People who see it, they don't last long." Richard tried to laugh it off, but the weight in her voice was chilling. A man at the counter leaned in and said, "It follows sound. That's why people hear the dragging. It hunts through echoes." That night, Richard checked out of the motel, planning to head straight home. But as he reached the truck, he found 3 deep gashes on the driver's door, like something had clawed through metal. His stomach dropped. The flashlight flickered in his hand. Then, from the woods, he heard the whisper again. This time, it said his name. The road wound through black forests and empty fields. Every few minutes, he checked the mirrors, half expecting to see a shadow clinging to the back of the truck. The whispers grew louder. His phone lost signal. Then, as he passed an old bridge, the truck jerked violently to one side. A loud clang echoed beneath. Richard stopped and stepped out with a trembling hand. Underneath the truck was the hook. It had lodged itself into the axle like it had been thrown with force. He stumbled back, his mind racing. "No, this isn't real. This isn't real," he muttered. The hook was old, blackened with rust and something darker. Blood. He grabbed it with a rag and flung it into the woods, heart pounding. But before he got back into the truck, he saw footprints in the dirt. One foot normal, the other ending in a deep, round puncture, like a peg, like a stump with a hook. Nora was asleep, unaware. He didn't wake her. Richard sat in the kitchen, staring at the wall, the silence around him now menacing. Every creak of the house made him flinch. He washed his hands again and again, but the smell of rust wouldn't go away. That night, he finally told Nora everything. She didn't laugh. She believed him, maybe too quickly. Then she told him something he never expected. "I've heard it too," she whispered. "Years ago, before I met you, I was on a road trip with a friend. We saw the hook." Her hands trembled. "My friend vanished that night. Everyone thought she ran away. But I knew. I heard the dragging too." Richard stared at her, his mind spiraling. Whatever this thing was, it didn't forget. And it didn't forgive. New house, new town, new state. But the whispers followed. Sometimes faint, sometimes near. One night, the hook was in their garage, just hanging from the ceiling like a sick trophy. Nora broke down. Richard burned it. But the next morning, it was back, clean this time, gleaming, and on it, etched in the curve, was a name, Richard. They no longer slept. They barely spoke. Their days were silent and their nights were filled with terror. Every sound, every knock, creak, or wind-blown leaf could be him, the hooked shadow, not a ghost, not a man, something in between, something that lived in the silence between sounds and travelled through fear. Richard woke to the sound of dripping water. He got up, checked the kitchen, nothing, but the front door was open. The air outside was freezing, though there was no wind. He stepped out barefoot, drawn to something unseen. There in the middle of the driveway stood a tall, cloaked figure. One arm ended in a long, curved hook. The other pointed at him. Richard's shame never left his throat. The next morning, Nora found only his footprints and the hook lying perfectly centered on their bed. Michael Hanley had driven nearly every back road in the Appalachian stretch of Pennsylvania, but something about County Route 39A felt misplaced. The pavement looked newer than the map suggested, the curves unnatural. It wasn't on his GPS either, but after his usual route was blocked by a landslide, the hand-painted detour signs had led him here. A man in his 50s, Michael was practical, level-headed, and proud of it. He didn't scare easy, but the moment he passed the second rusted milestone marked with a crooked hook symbol, an uneasy tightness settled in his chest. Still, he told himself it was just late, just the dark playing tricks. He tightened his grip on the wheel and pressed on. 30 minutes in, Michael spotted a stretch of shattered wood to his right. A fence long abandoned, eaten by vines. But what caught his eye wasn't the decay. It was the fresh gouges along the post, like something sharp had raked across it, dragging deep into the wood. He stopped, stepped out. The air was colder here, not just cooler, wrong. It carried no sounds, No insects, no wind, just silence, absolute and oppressive. As he walked toward the fence, his boots crunched on something brittle. Bone, tiny fragments scattered beneath the soil. He turned back to his truck, but something had changed. The air reeked of iron. Back on the road, Michael heard something odd over the radio, an old folk song playing softly. He hadn't touched the dial. The voice was female, distant, barely humming over the crackling static. There's a hook in the hollow, and he walks by night. Then it stopped. His headlights flickered. Just ahead, a figure darted across the road. A man, tall, moving with an unnatural tilt, dragging something behind him that scraped like metal on stone. Michael slammed the brakes, heart hammering, eyes scanning the woods. He arrived at a faded wooden bridge, the beams damp and splintered with age. At its center stood a man in overalls, one arm covered in bandages, the other holding an old lantern. Michael slowed. "You're not from around here," the man said, voice dry as paper. "They told you to follow the signs, didn't they?" Michael frowned. "Just a detour." "There's no detour on this road," the man said, then pointed to Michael's hands. 3 tiny blood spots dotted his skin. "You've been marked." Michael tried to laugh it off, drove on fast, leaving the old man behind. But the words echoed, marked, the song, the hook, the gouges on the fence. None of it made sense, but all of it felt connected. That night at a roadside motel, he dreamed of water, murky, black and bottomless. A hook spiraling down into it, attached to nothing. He woke with a shout, the shape of something large crouching at the end of the bed, fading into shadow. His hands were shaking. He hadn't locked the door, and outside, something dragged slowly across the gravel. The motel's manager swore no one else had checked in. No cameras, no keys missing. But Michael knew better. The markings on his hands had deepened, not scratches, symbols, crude but deliberate, like signatures. Desperate, he sought out the local library. An elderly woman, the only staff there, stared at the marks and whispered, "He collects regrets. That's what they say. The ones who vanish on Route 39A all made a mistake. A choice they buried." Michael hadn't thought of Anna in years. A girl he loved once, lost touch. She had written letters, desperate, unwell, begged for help. He'd ignored them. Later, he heard she went missing. Her last address? Near this county, near Edavane Hollow. Suddenly, it all clicked. The voice in the song, the hook in the trees, the detour. This wasn't a random haunting. It was targeted, personal. Something or someone had led him here. He returned to the trail, to the broken fence. Fog swallowed the path. From the woods, he heard her voice now. "You left me." And then he saw her, Anna, just as he remembered. But her eyes were wrong, hollow, reflecting not light, but memory. "He let me speak for a price," she whispered. Behind her, a shadow rose. Michael tried to run, but the ground wouldn't let him. It pulled, grabbed, held him in place. The last thing he saw was the glint of the hook, not swinging, not lunging, but waiting for him to finally stop denying what he had done. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. The kind of weekend when you forget about the bills, the meetings, the creaky knees and the thinning hair. Just 3 old friends, Tom, Marvin, and Greg. escaping the city to spend a quiet few days at Greg's late uncle's cabin by the lake, nestled deep in the forested outskirts of Black Hollow. The place had been locked up for over a decade, and honestly, none of them were expecting much more than dusty furniture, spider webs, and maybe a few beers by the fireplace. But the rain started just as they turned off the main road. A slow drizzle at first, then heavy sheets that made the windshield wipers struggle. Figures, Tom had muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. The tires crunched on the gravel driveway as they finally arrived. The cabin stood at the edge of the woods like something out of an old postcard. If the postcard had been soaked, torn, and forgotten for years. That's when Marvin noticed something odd. One of the porch posts had been split in half, as if someone, or something, had rammed into it. He pointed, but Greg shrugged. Storm damage, probably, he said. But all three of them felt it, even if no one spoke it out loud. The air felt heavier, the trees too still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Inside, the cabin smelled like mold, wet ash, and time. They lit up lanterns since the power was still out. Greg led them to the back room to check the fuse box, but the door wouldn't open. It had been padlocked shut. "That's weird," Greg murmured. "This used to be Uncle Ed's office." Tom leaned in, shining his flashlight on the rusted padlock. What the hell would he need to lock in there? The wood around the door was scratched. Not random, accidental scuffs, but deliberate gouges, some of them wet, like claw marks, Marvin said under his breath, stepping back. None of them laughed. Later that night, after a fire warmed the room and the beers had loosened their nerves, Greg hesitated before speaking. "My uncle used to talk about something called the hooked shadow," he said, eyes fixed on the fire. "Said it was some local legend, maybe older than the town itself." Marvin scoffed, but Tom leaned forward. "What kind of legend?" Greg took a deep breath. "A man, or a thing, seen in the woods, always at dusk, always after a storm. Said he had a massive hook instead of a left hand, and he'd drag it behind him. Not fast, just slow, scraping through the tree." They all laughed it off. That kind of nervous laughter that tastes like childhood fears you thought you'd outgrown. But by midnight, when the wind howled through the cracks and the fire had burned low, none of them were laughing. Tom was the first to hear it. A dragging sound, metallic, inconsistent, like something being pulled along dirt and stone. "You hear that?" he whispered. Marvin sat up, squinting toward the window. Outside, something moved. They stepped onto the porch, flashlights cutting through the rain. The forest loomed silent. Then they saw it. Deep, distinct gouges in the earth, leading from the woods to the side of the cabin. Something had been dragged through the mud. Something heavy. Greg couldn't sleep. He kept staring at the locked office door. Just after 2 a.m., he got up and broke the lock open with a crowbar. "I have to know," he said. The door creaked open, revealing a room choked with dust, rotted books, and hunting trophies. But above the desk was a hook, not decorative, rusted, bloody, real. Marvin stepped back immediately. "Why the hell is that in here?" Greg was silent, his face had gone pale. That's the same one he described from the stories. The next night, they tried to convince themselves it was all some elaborate trick. Maybe local kids messing with them. Maybe paranoia. But when Greg found scratches on the inside of the bedroom window, long, arching gouges, they couldn't deny it anymore. Tom packed his bag. "We're leaving. Screw this weekend." But the car wouldn't start. Battery dead. No cell signal. The forest around them felt awake. That evening, they sat with every light on, waiting. No one spoke much. Then, around 9:30 p.m., the lights flickered, then went out completely. Total darkness, except for the fire. In that flickering glow, they saw it. Just outside the living room window, a shape, tall, lurching, the unmistakable glint of rust, and the soft, wet sound of something being dragged along wood. They barricaded the doors, pushed furniture against every window. Marvin clutched a kitchen knife like it meant something. "We're gonna die here," he whispered. "We're actually going to die here." Hours passed. Rain slammed the roof. Then, silence. Morning came with fog. The door was wide open, yet untouched. No signs of forced entry. Just one thing left behind on the porch. A bloody trail, leading into the woods. Only Greg remained. His eyes were hollow, shirt torn. He couldn't speak, just clutched something tightly in his shaking hands. The rusted hook.